When I explain how to interview, and obviously the primary focus here is going to be what I've done, do interviews in esports, but this actually, in general, applies to the wider sphere of interviewing. Spoiler, I actually have a side channel where I do lots of long-form interviews with fascinating individuals from other fields that I'm just interested in, or their work, or think there's something of value they bring to the community. And spoiler, as you'll find out, basically the skill of interviewing is sort of learning to listen to people and understand them, see things from their POV, and then interact with them and create a fascinating discussion between you and them and some sort of understanding at some point in time, hopefully help them explain themselves. So I can give you all sorts of angles here, but I'll just start by saying this is not going to be like media training concepts from university or the kind of things like a journalism degree might teach you. And I can give you advice because that's my style. I like to be pretty cards on the table. I'll even tell people the techniques of what I'm doing. I sometimes say it on shows and break the fourth wall and explain to my hosts why I do something a certain way and how I do it, because I'm actually communicating to them, both literally and sub-communicating, like, listen to what I'm saying, follow it, like, keep your eye out on this, look for the tells, you'll see how the techniques work, which is why a lot of my co-hosts on talk shows level up as we go. But the thing is, if you know my style, another reason I don't mind revealing secrets is most people can't use them. Like, a lot of people listen to this who are even interviewers and they'll go, oh, interesting. And then they won't apply any of the stuff. They'll just go away and keep doing what they were doing anyway and not really ever listen to what I was saying. Because most secrets to anything to do with getting good involve applied, dedicated practice and then self-reflection. Things that most people are terrible at because they're skills you have to build up. You're not just born coming out the womb with these abilities. You have to actually hone them and understand why they're valuable and then see them applied, see the benefits of them and keep going and keep going. But I actually think those things there, dedicated, applied practice, not just raw reps, and self-reflection are actually anathema to a lot of people, including people with talent. But the thing is, interviewing, this is my true craft. At its core, this is what I'm probably the best at in esports. Yeah, I do writing and narratives, and I come up with my own thoughts separately. Also, I've done analysis in games like CSGO. A lot of that stuff came later. Those are other things I moved into as side ventures. At its core, my best thing has always been interviewing because it's where I've put most of my focus in my 21-year plus career at this point in time. From 2001 onwards, I already was going ham on interviews. I started in written interviews. That was the best format for me. I wasn't a guy who was very social, very outgoing, great at conversation. So that allowed me a controlled framework. I was doing on the internet via text, using like text programs, MSN Messenger, AOL Instant Messenger, ICQ, IRC, because you have more time. So you've got a lot more space to navigate around the questions and the answers. You can backspace, like you start writing a question, that's not the way I want to phrase it, or I haven't done that right. You can delete that back. You can think about what they said for longer before asking your next question. You can have more prepared and all different angles you can go with, like a flow chart. Then along came going to events and doing audio interviews. The problem was I had issues. I hadn't yet developed my social skill set. I would get kind of a bit anxious when it got, so there was some silence, or I couldn't think of the next question, or I feel like they gave me an answer I didn't expect and I don't know where to go from here, and I would end the interview early. But over time, I built up sort of my resistance to giving up in that sense and staying in the pocket of the awkwardness and learning to generate questions on the fly and not always have to go off things you had before or just things that they said. By the time video came around, I was already leveling up. Even though, if you go look at SK Gaming, Teammates, I wasn't appearing on camera there. I was just a voice behind the camera asking the questions. But now I've got the skill set to keep it going, keep it rolling. Then I came on camera, I think it would have been in 2013 maybe, when I started doing stuff with On Gamers, and I became more part of the interview myself. Now, you'll notice in the early days, my interviews were almost what you'd get from like a fanzine with a famous creator or figure, that player that they're into, which is, it was just a lot of nerd questions of like just facts and what games you played and what things in this. And it was just a sort of the more basic stuff, but just very in-depth version of it. Now, I try to make my interviews more like, some of those things are going to anchor the interview, but we're going to be talking about ideas and concepts and bigger picture stuff and reflection on who you are and who you were then and who this person is and contrasting them and relationships that you have. So I've tried to make it so there's a lot more there for people to take away depending on what they like from an interview. That's what I like from an interview most now. So to me, talking to people, which is the essence of interviewing, is actually the ultimate skill or meta skill you can learn in life. The skill, what you want to be able to do is talk to all kinds of people. So, if you might think to yourself as a young man, I want to get good at talking to girls, mate, it's the same skill set as talking to people in general. Because you've got to have layers, you've got to have stages, you've got to have amounts of depth, you've got to have a horizontal way of talking, you've got to have a vertical way of talking. So when you talk to people in general, these are the skills that teach you how to talk to women, because guess what? Women are people too. So learn small talk. Learn when that's the appropriate thing and just stay there and have some little small talk and make it fun and playful and be cognizant of the time. And maybe sometimes that's the only place you stay, to feel the waters out. That's what small talk is for, to see how aligned you are with that person. See if you want to have a deeper conversation. Then you learn openers. What are the lines you say at the beginning to open someone? What facial gesture do you have? And how do you get them to warm up to you and want to talk to you? Learn how to keep a conversation going once it starts. Maybe they're going to drop it a little bit. Maybe they just had said their piece and they don't know what to say next. Listen to them. This is one of the most important skill sets you can have, the ability to actually listen to them and then apply what you want to say and where it's going to go from there and get a gauge of who they are. Know when to be playful. Know when to be serious. Make it enjoyable. Make it be a value add to their day that they had this conversation or they took part in this interview. Don't be a bore. Don't make it like you're actually, the famous saying about people who are boring is you deny them solitude without providing them company. Don't be that guy, or no one's going to want to talk to you. They're going to end all the conversations early. They're going to walk away. They're not going to go out their way to talk to you. Be able to let the conversation end when it's appropriate. Maybe you didn't vibe with this person. Maybe they didn't like you. Maybe they didn't give you the feeling back. Maybe you tried a few different angles. You talked to them. Maybe from listening to them, they're just not your sort of person either. And you can just let it go. You don't have to be the one where they're always going, I've got to go now. You can sometimes be that guy. Well, anyway, I'll catch you on later. It's nice to talk to you. Maybe we'll do it again sometime. So when it comes to interviews, has anyone done more than me? Like if we're talking about like written interviews, I mean, I've done well over 100 of those in my career. It's probably even generous. Let's be real, probably like 300 of those in my career. If we're going for audio, I'd say 100 to 200 if we think of all the events I went to. I used to do like 5 to 10 interviews at each event. I've just always been someone who did loads in that sense. Video, I'm obviously gone ham in that sense. I don't think anyone can fuck with me. If we're going on like just literal video interviews, not talk shows, I'm going to say, I mean, on my YouTube, there's over 500 listed. I would say from other websites, SK Gaming, I think we're looking at something like maybe 500, 600. We're talking in that sort of range. Because remember, I used to do short form interviews as well. And at events, I do loads of those as well. We're just looking at long form interviews only in video. Easily 500. I'd say if I think about it, grilled, reflections. There was even SK one-on-one back in the day. If you add in talk shows, which I can tell you interviewing is the primary skill set for talk shows, as well as then, as I have to learn, being able to talk yourself and have your own perspective and be a pundit. On my YouTube right now, it lists 1,412 talk shows I've been a part of. Let's say we take out the ones where I'm a guest and I'm not the host. Maybe that's 1,300. Interview component's enormous in that sense. So collectively, we're talking about like, say 3,000 interviews done in my career. That's the sort of reps I've put in. And that's how much I've had to focus to master my craft. So let's get into how you interview. Like, first things first, this is my number one thing because it's going to come with listening. Care about who you're interviewing. Don't just cynically take an interview because it's a famous person or you want to do it or for your job. Pick people you want to interview, you want to talk to, you want to listen to, you want to know things about, you want to compare notes with, you want to ask them things you always thought about. It's going to be an easy motivation to do a good interview then because it's someone you want to talk to, someone you're already interested in. You're not having to fake the funk like mainstream does all the time. So I've heard that, earlier in your career, you don't know anything about me. You just read something on the internet. Now you're pretending with a fake smile on your face like you care about me. There's a reason mainstream interviews can never get onto my level because I actually care about the people I'm interviewing and care about their thoughts, even if they're players I maybe don't like. Maybe I want to get a different take on it, see their side of things. I haven't talked to them before. Maybe I've had my own thoughts and heard other things about them, but I want to see what they actually have to say. Also, don't ask easy 101 questions. Like, don't insult the person. Don't ask the questions that like everyone's asked 1,000 times, but you didn't bother watching another interview. It's your first interview, so you're asking them the 101 questions. Like, if you actually care about them, you wouldn't waste their time like that. You'd waste your time in that analogy. It's not a waste of time. Going and actually seeing what people said about them. And then, like I said earlier, ideally make the interview subject someone you've followed the career of that you actually are interested in already, not just for the interview. Now, research is a massive part, especially early in your career. I don't have to do much in the modern day because I live this game. My research is doing talk shows, is reading all the things about them, is watching other interviews. I'm essentially doing my research every day, and the interviews are a byproduct of that. But if you're not someone who's done that and lived this life, then start with heavy research. I can tell you when I came into games like StarCraft 2 and League of Legends, which weren't my games at all, I did heavy research. Because it wasn't like Counter-Strike and Quake where I've watched all the games and I was there and I remember what everyone said and I know the game myself and the meta and how it's played. So I had to rely on research early on to get my foot in the door, to make the questions interesting, to elicit some sort of interest from someone who knows loads about the game that I don't know much about. In general, a beginner interview, you're in my shoes whether you know the game or not. So go away and listen and read past interviews. Listen to their appearances on talk shows and take notes. Go look up AMAs they did and see what they were willing to say to the fans and what they thought of certain things. By the way, written interviews are easily the best to look at because you can just skim read them. You can skip past the questions that aren't interesting. You get through them really quick in a way you can't in a YouTube video, even if it's on 2 or 3 times speed. But here's the key thing, and this is so key, because a rookie mistake is you do all this research, you get all these notes, and then you just bombard this guy like it was some sort of insane interrogation scene where he has to answer everything so you can show off what you've known, looked up, and you think, no, the research is for you. It's to inform you, so you're a better interviewer. It's not for them, and it's not for the audience. A lot of it's going to be inappropriate or too nerdy or just like besides the point. Don't do it to show off. What you want to do here is apply Hemingway's iceberg theory. And by the way, Monty grilled me in my grill series and asked about this topic, and I explained the key concept there. Basically, there's only the tiny part of the iceberg pops out of the water. The rest is a massive part underwater. The part underwater is all your research combined with the part above. The part above is just the necessary or relevant part that you can actually showcase in the interview when you talk to the person. You sometimes need to know all that stuff to know where not to talk about, or just to know other things in case they say something related to that, and now you've got the info to pull from. Yes, well, that does relate to actually something else. Maybe we'll talk about that now. If you don't have that there, you've got nothing to go with. But at the same time, if you're bombarding them, it's going to be a very boring interview. No one wants to talk about every detail of their life and career ever and everything they ever said. So to show off, it ain't the place to show off, boys. Then, don't ask the one-on-one questions, as I said before. Because what happens is, when I do an interview, I'm going to have gone and listened to their interviews. I'm going to have had them on talk shows or listened to them on talk shows. So I'm going to know what they've talked about. And not only am I not just going to repeat it, or I might just make what they said part of my answer. I know you said elsewhere this, but what about this? Now here's my own thought. Here's my own follow-up. In general, a massive technique I use, especially when I'm new to a game, is to follow up on the questions and answers of other interviews. The ones that the interviewer didn't think to or didn't have the skill to do a follow-up on. Or it's just not an angle he's considered before. Or maybe the player isn't forthcoming enough and doesn't hint at that, so they don't know to ask that question. A lot of people, a lot of players, even if they're very confident, they sort of require permission to speak at length, especially in an interview where it's your interview, you're controlling it. So sometimes you have to sort of make it clear with follow-ups or a long question yourself with a lot of different angles they can go on, that it's up to them how much they want to say, that they can speak more, and actually you're very interested to hear more. That's why listening is going to be so key. And by the way, even if they're going to, in the answer, flame someone or be a bit critical, you'll notice sometimes I shield them by making the question way harder than their answer will be, or bringing in some rumor or something I heard, because then it allows them a buffer, so they're never going as hard as I am. So now they can be a bit cheeky. Now they can banter a bit. Now they can flame someone a bit, but it won't be like what I said. It might even sound like they're sort of downplaying a little bit what I said, but allowing them to still get the flame out there. I'm basically the flak that attracts the missile, so their MiG or F-16 can keep flying and doesn't blow up from fan criticism, right? Or backlash. Then also, I've always said this, to me, an interview is a team sport. You're a duo. You're not combatants. It's not a debate. So as a result, I'm perfectly willing to be the heel and be the boring one and be the one who asks the question that's too hard. I'm willing to do all that so that they can look good and be the baby face and explain themselves and be in a position where they're talking about what they're comfortable about. But I did put to them something that maybe was like, what about this criticism though? But then they get their space that's comfortable in which to answer it and to give their thoughts on it and address it in a way that's not hostile. Also, just as an aside, a main reason you also do research is because pro players will frequently get their own history wrong or mixed up. And they actually will give you nonsense answers because they'll think, right, well, that event was after this one, and it was the other way around. And I remember we lost at that one, but before we won. So I think, yeah, what happened is we won. And then afterwards, because we were like riding high, we got a bit cocky, so we dropped off. It's like, actually, it was the other way around. But if you can't say that or you can't do a follow-up in that sense, you're just going to get nonsense Garbage in, garbage out. Their memories weren't good, and therefore the answer's not going to be good either. Crucially, I've stressed it so many times already, listen to them. Listen when they're talking. Ideally, maintain eye contact. Show them with your facial features and the emotions written on your face if what they're saying is interesting. You'll notice sometimes in interviews, whether I agree or not, there's times where they're saying something and I know if I give them nothing, they're just going to stop soon and they'll just make the point and they'll see, am I more interested? Sometimes, yeah, right. And I'm not, all right, I'm nodding to those ones. Now, idiots at home, he's just nodding to you, agree to them. No, that's not how it works at all. You don't know the technical skills of what I'm doing. Also, when you're listening to them, even if you're listening and you're looking, don't just be thinking of the next question. Once you build up your skill set, you'll have, as they talk, an idea spring to mind of what we can talk about next. And then as they talk, you'll see where it goes and you'll see if you can connect that. If not, then you'll go to something else and then you'll essentially present that to them and you'll repeat the same process. Don't follow a script of questions. If you ask them a question and they give you a really interesting answer, it's going to be whack if you just go to like number 2 and it's like, what about at this? So you just ignored completely everything he said. There was no follow-up there. There was no other angle there. They're actually teasing, hey, maybe I've got a lot to say about this stuff, but you don't give them that. You just go straight to the next one. Like, that's going to kill the whole flow of the interview. I would also say, watch my style. I very rarely, unless they're saying something I want to quickly double check a fact on, I very rarely ever look at a second monitor during an interview or during a talk show. I look at my webcam, I look at their box on Discord, Skype, whatever it used to be, and I try to engage with them. I try to make them feel heard and seen and that someone cares about what they're talking about and that, yeah, maybe someone wants them to keep going and continue on and that, all right, and are they getting a response? I want them to have all this. Because even when it's online, you want to engage them. You want to emotionally reach a place in the middle where you have a great conversation. You'll notice if they're talking and you're over here and you're clicking stuff and they can see on your face like different pages are loading up and you're looking at that and you're typing to someone. People will be making a point, but they'll be looking and you can see them desperately looking for engagement and they'll start to just trail off and they'll just, I'll just end the answer there. And then you'll go, yep, oh yeah, well, I mean, what you could say, and you weren't listening. You actually let the fire go out in that scenario instead of tending to it and keeping it kindling and keeping it going so it becomes a blazing inferno of amazing conversations and ideas back and forth. Then how about this? Tie what they just said to whatever you're going to say now or have yourself or what they said previously to what your next question is. Don't just make it like, right, hard cut, here's another topic. It's like, no, it's like you were saying earlier, I actually wonder, because when you did play in that team, you said this, but I've always talked about this. Now, they don't know I wanted to maybe ask about that topic anyway, but I'm going to tie it together, and by constantly calling back like that and referencing, I'm stitching the conversation together so it feels appropriate to talk about it now. So they feel like I am listening to what they're saying, I'm taking it on board, I'm accepting their premises sometimes, and I'm building on that, and I'm really interested in them. I want to know this, not just for the sake of itself, but in light of what they've said and other thoughts they might have that we haven't yet explored. I'm encouraging them, I'm showing them I'm curious. Follow up on the points that they make and then what it makes you think of. Ideally, a lot of their great answers will be a springboard to a question you hadn't thought of. And you might go in with like 5-10 topics. You might not even get through the first 5. You might get through the first 10 in the first 2 minutes. Either way, you're going to use what they say to guide you as to where you're going to go or what's interesting based on what they say because you're actually listening to them. Also, I didn't do this for a long time and this was a mistake. Because I have a really good memory, I didn't use a notepad at all. Now, what I do now is I have a notepad in front of me with a pen on most talk shows and interviews. And when they're talking, if they do say something interesting in the middle of a big floor, I'll just write down a keyword. And then what I'll do is I'll maybe write down a keyword, put a little arrow, a quick thing I thought of, another couple of keywords. And then afterwards, either I ask a question straight, just following upon what they say at the end, or I might say, well, you were talking earlier actually about the way you played with this teammate in this era. And that's actually always made me work. And then you got another question right there. But you could also revert to things from your research as the question if they didn't give a good answer. Research is the fallback. It's not actually the vanguard of everything you're doing. And then also, in line with don't look at the second, don't be distracted while they talk. If you're distracted, they'll notice it. You'll notice it. You won't be engaged in what they're saying. You're just going rote through the next things you're talking. You're showing that you don't care, because actually you don't care. That's why you're distracted. A key thing to listening is it's going to help you with what I'm now about to talk about, which is learn personality types and player archetypes. Not from some book. There's not like some big 5 thing I got. Maybe you could do that. It's not my style. Obviously, that's like the Jordan Peterson approach. I would just say I learned it just through experience, just through listening to people, just through noticing there's similarities between these types of people or even these cultures or these styles of players. And by the way, here's a little pro tip for you. People's playing style in the game is actually reflective of their character and who they are outside the game and their personality. You'll have to just learn that over time, but you will notice it. It's very, very key. I mean, I'll just say the obvious contrast, if you're someone from League of Legends, would be like, think about Reckless and Forgiven, and then their playing styles in the game, but then their personalities outside of the game. Then think about things like, if you're in CSGO, what about the difference between someone like Simple and someone like Stiko? Then look at their games. Which one needs more resources? Which one's fiery, more explosive? Which one's the more stable guy, the team player, the ones thinking... Exactly, you can see it, right? They're extreme examples, because I'm trying to very quickly make the case, but you'll start to notice you can put people in a lot of different pots, and they can be in big ones, this type aggressive player. They can get smaller ones, like, right, he's aggressive because he really wants to win. This one's aggressive because he tilts if people do things wrong. This one's aggressive because he has to have everything catered. There's all these different approaches, but once you start to get these groups out and you can narrow the focus and you can get more specific, you will interview someone you haven't talked to much or haven't known as well, but from someone else you have as a reference point, you'll be able to intuit or guess at certain things, which then might be very interesting in the interview. So there are groups and similarities which are shared more than you would realize if you were an amateur or not someone in the industry. So observe these people before you interview them. Observe them while you interview them. Research them. Listen to them. And you will start to figure out which pot they go into. Then you'll find out what kind of angles to take based on who they are and how they like to talk and what they're willing to say. If they turn out to be very talkative, you switch it up. You trim any smaller questions or less important topics. You just ask the big heavy hitters and you give them a chance to talk. Then you just let them go. In general, I'll let them talk and get all their major thoughts out. I don't interrupt unless, and this is where experience allows you to make this executive decision, they get stuck in patterns. They start to become boring. They aren't progressing the topic. They're going back and adding just more disclaimers and repeating. Well, I think, like I said before, what I mean to, and then they're just doing the same thing. That's when I will get, like, I'm going to cut you off because we've only got limited time. So we're going to talk about the next thing now. If they turn out to not be talkative or they don't like to expound, they just make a point. And then they wait, and they see, do you want to ask more? Then you take over. You do the work. You're going to be the one often talking a lot of the time here, but the amount of info you're going to get out of them is going to be great. You tease the information out of them. You set up that you want to know more. You ask, well, why would that be, though? Did anyone ever ask you about the way that was? Did a teammate ever wonder what you were doing? You keep going, and eventually they'll give you an answer that would have been one really long answer from a talkative person, but you had to just do more work, more leg work, and more the heavy lifting to get them to that point. I am willing to do the heavy lifting for the people who don't think much or talk much on the concepts, on the angles I'm referring to. I don't just say the angle. Now, here's the thing. If I wanted to just look good, yeah, you could just edit out your questions, stitch together their answers into one big block, and it'd look like, wow, he just asked something simple, and they answered a massive thing. Wow, he's very talkative, great interview. No, I actually don't like that style, mainly because I am a nerd. I am super hardcore. So I actually personally like it. I think people like me would enjoy this, to see what questions I asked, but they didn't answer, or what angles they didn't choose to take up. So you go, oh, he's actually not interested, or he didn't think that about that. That's revealing in its own way. I'm doing a unique kind of an interview. I wouldn't do this interview if I was on mainstream television. It wouldn't actually be appropriate. Then how about this? You've done your research, you've been listening to them, they're giving answers. How about you bring something to the table? Don't just ask it in this match, 16-14, why did you lose and why was it so close? No, that's obvious. Present some new ideas or concepts or connections you thought of while researching or while they were talking, or based on other things their teammates have said or happened in the game, etc. Ask some things they haven't thought of. Give them some novelty. Inspire their curiosity. Get them to go down an interesting sort of intellectual path. Some of the best answers come from them reacting to or seeing sort of things put together they hadn't considered. Think about when I did my Reflections interview with Doublelift, where he said at some point that I'm like his therapist or something, because I just read his mind. Or you think of some of the people who are like friends of mine over the years that I've gotten banger interviews out of, like Upset and Forgiven and Naniwa. That's because I know these people. And I have my own thoughts about things that maybe they talked about, but I never mentioned to them, and I'm just going to reveal it now, and then let's do it together. Let's have fun down this journey. It's almost more like a Joe Rogan podcast in that regard, isn't it? Then, as you can imagine, by me talking about how many interviews I did and how long it took me to get good at all types of interviewing, and comfortable and have a skill set and be able to stay in the pocket, get tons of reps in. It's the same about becoming good at anything, by the way. If you're bad at a game, don't have ladder anxiety. Do the opposite. Spam the ladder. Play so much that as a result, you get a lot of the kinks worked out. You do actually have time to make your mistakes and then learn from them. So in terms of interviews, get comfortable with silence from them for a moment. Get comfortable with awkwardness. By the way, sometimes silence is appropriate for a second if they said something crazy, they don't have anything more to say. Awkwardness, that's going to happen. Allow it to be there for a second. You can always edit it out if you want. And in the moment, maybe that's even telling of how different what they said was from what you thought, or they totally cut off some angle you had. Spontaneity is going to be the king here. If you're comfortable being spontaneous, you can fall back on your research, you can go by a script, you can just go off what they said, or you can go somewhere completely different. You've got the whole skill set. It's your choice. You're like one of those great basketball players like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, where you could play in the offense and you could take the shot that's obvious, but you can also create any shot you want. You can have a game where you score 50 points, you score from a different place on the floor each time and with a different shot. How can any defender fuck with you at that point in time? This is how you learn to interview anyone. Now remember, you can also exit any topic at any time and re-enter a topic at any time. You can always go back. Actually, earlier when we talked about that, I want to go back to that. That's how you can do it if you feel like, I haven't got a question in this moment, I can't quite frame it. Then ask something else that's also interesting, get them talking on that, and then find a way, there'll eventually be a connection that you can work your way back to it with multiple questions or one very skillfully done. And then also, have planned paths, depending on, like a game plan going into the match, as it were, in this case, the interview. But then also be able to take digressions, to have on the fly, I'm going to go over here instead. And if that's really interesting, I'm just going to keep mining over there, mate. We're going to see how much we can get out of that. And then maybe we'll come back to this topic later, or not at all, if it's not necessary or no longer appropriate. Just remember, if you do your job well and you commit yourself to interviewing, no one's going to remember the first 100 interviews. Most people who watch my interviews now, you haven't even watched the first 1,000 interviews I did. That's why I'm a master. Because you didn't have to see me when I was an apprentice, when I was failing, when I was having hard times, when I was going well at one point and then I fucked it up, or when it was like not that good, but I sort of got it all right at the end. There's a saying, the master has failed more times than the apprentice has tried. There's people out there done 3 interviews and want to talk at their top interview and have people listen to them. Why would we? Who cares about your first 3 interviews? They're all going to be garbage, I can tell you straight out of the gate. They're not going to be good. Maybe you got really lucky and you got a really talkative player who just gave you some good answers. That can occasionally happen. It won't happen consistently though, I'll tell you that much. Put in your reps. Earn your status and your respect. Also, if you notice me, this is what's different about how I am on Twitter, how I am on desks, and how I am in talk shows. I don't like hostile style of interviews. I think gotchas are actually immoral or unethical because, as I said, I consider it a conversation that we're working on together as a team to actually represent this person's thoughts and get really interesting ideas out there and let them show another side to themselves. I invite a player because I want to have a conversation with them and find out their perspective. My interviews are the opposite of a gotcha. I want to reveal the totality of who they are and show other sides to them. I want to humanize them and explain them to people and have them explain themselves and address certain things, but in their own comfortable way. So that as a result, people that you thought were arseholes and toxic and idiots and failed, suddenly you find out there's more to the story, maybe. Maybe they actually have a good explanation. Maybe there's some other things going on you had no clue about and actually it's suddenly understandable the way they behaved. I'm not there to push back and be rude or argue with them or tell them they're wrong. I can do that on talk shows. On talk shows, I'm a participant. It's not an interview solely. I'm there to say my thoughts as well. And sometimes if they're boring, I'm there to take over the show. By the way, half the time people, more than 99% of the time people are like, you won't let him talk. Oh, you keep cutting him off. I know better than you that he had nothing else to say there. I know what he was saying was boring and was going nowhere. I've talked to this guy privately even, and I thought it would be really interesting or funny or entertaining angle. I'm going to revive the show, and then I even might give them a chance. Oh, by the way, I cut you off there. What were you going to say? And let's say, oftentimes they just say nothing. Oh, I didn't really have anything. I was just going to say this. Like, I have a skill for that. You as the viewer do not understand. Talk shows are entirely a different kettle of fish, and they are certainly not an interview of the player. And there are a lot of players who are quite boring. They don't have very great takes on talk shows. That's why my 2-man episodes with the people I've reported with are just better. But we bring the players on because they can bring unique information and insights we don't have. But at the same time, they're not really usually the best guests on these talk shows. Also, you might think, he's giving away his whole game plan here. Everyone's going to level up and beat you, Thorin. No. First of all, use my shit. Go and do better interviews. Great, I'll get good interviews to watch myself. You'll never beat me, by the way. Not only do I have the 3,000 reps, I'm keeping doing it now. I'm thinking about this stuff all the time. My life that I live is making my interviews better and better and better and better. I'm even doing stuff on my side channel, like I say. And also, by the way, when you do a really good interview that I'll get to enjoy watching, awesome. When I watch it, it'll make me think of other questions and topics and follow-ups you didn't ask, and I'll ask the banger follow-up anyway. That's the game, boyos. Welcome to the arena. Before you were just a spectator or a fanboy getting a signature, essentially. Come into the actual arena, the gladiatorial combat, and actually start interviewing and see if you can be a great interviewer.
Hey, it's simple, you're watching Thorin channel. Shut the fuck up, you fucking bitch.
I've been pleasantly surprised during the time I've had my Patreon and my Patreon community, the Skrilluminati, by both the financial support they've provided and the moral support. And so this video was kindly supported and made possible by Starlust, Theo Buenzli, Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Thorin, Jensen Goh, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Bot Pounder 420, Yerka 86, Tosh, and as always, you know it, a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to ask a question in one of those AMAs where I tend to go pretty in depth? Sometimes they even spin out into their own videos. Do you want teasers to find out who the upcoming guests are for the myriad of interviews that I do across esports? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest. We have a channel on my Discord where you can do that if you're at the right tier. And of course, you could potentially take part in one of those lengthy esports discussions with me about whatever is on your mind in the scene. Well, if any of those perks sound tantalizing, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.